It's wonderful to see so many people here. Wonderful to find classical studies at the University of Reading in really good spirits and making fresh starts on things and looking to the future. And I think great that we're calling it after Percy Ure, because I think he represented, so far as I've been able to work out, and though your museum of course tells us that the Reading tradition has been a very broad tradition of classical studies. It's reached in many directions, and I think it has been rich for that reason. And my understanding that our lecturer this afternoon is going to reflect some of that as well. So I'm looking forward to it. Peter, I think, is going to tell us a little bit more about why we're here. I know Andrew Wallace-Hadrill, who was to be here, can't be, but is going to be here in spirit, having inhabited Catherine's body. So I will hand over. Thanks very much for coming, everybody, and do enjoy it.
I'm deeply sorry I cannot after all be with you this afternoon, and I hope you'll convey my regrets to everyone present. I am. I'm the sorrier because my time in the Department of Classics is one I recall with particular happiness. Reading was, and as I know from my recent visit, still is, a wonderful environment in which a culture of teaching and research in classics could thrive. Reading has, and still has, so much going for it. It's a department with an extraordinary turnover. Not one of the present staff in classics was there when I arrived, nor for that matter when I left for Rome in 1995. But college duties call me away from these happy memories. This is the punishment I must endure for my happy times in Reading and in Rome, that I find myself chairing a meeting of our investment committee to consider what to do about our high street shops closing one after another in the recession. And he says it was Galloway and Porter, the wonderful bookshop which had been our tenant for over a century, that started the collapse. Need I tell you how much rather I'd be with you? Have a glorious afternoon, and long may the department flourish.
Now, when I took over as head of department, my predecessor, Professor Barbara Goff, handed down to me 2 cardboard boxes and said, "This is the departmental archive." I inherited this from Tessa. That is when I started researching the departments, or in fact, our past. The results I've published on a webpage, and I just learned that I need to add Joyce Reynolds to that, which was unknown to me. I hadn't discovered this. It's still pretty much work in progress to some extent. I also still need Andrew Wallace-Hadrill's approval for a very youthful photo of it, but do have it before the photo's gone. But the webpage now exists, and it contains, in a nutshell, an astonishing array of outstanding names from Percy Ure up to today. And there are some common themes running through our history right from the beginning, and I think they explain something about the current composition as well as about the way we engage in classical research at Reading even today. From the very beginning, Reading seems to be a place of imagination, inspiration, and experiment. Classics may be a traditional discipline, but Reading has for 100 years now attracted scholars who looked at it from a different angle, asked new questions, or managed to expand the established views to material that did not receive the same attention elsewhere. We have a highly dedicated, driven, and acclaimed teachers in our department, and we have outstanding students who are a true credit to us. And this is the most important to me. These aspects are not separate. They are closely related and interconnected, rendering Reading's Classics department an intellectual and creative environment well established and of international excellence, in which I, for one, am delighted to work. Ad multos annos, happy birthday, Classics at Reading. And without further ado, let me introduce our speaker for the first Percy Ure Lecture, Professor Robin Osborne. Thank you very much.
It's a great honour to be asked to give the first Ure Lecture. I do have interests that very curiously cross with those of Ure. I too done the only archaeological fieldwork I ever really did in Boeotia and got drawn into issues of archaic Greek history. Unlike Ure, I haven't yet made my way to Justinian, but then he didn't make his way to Justinian until he retired, so I've got a little while yet, perhaps. As a young scholar, in his first academic position as a university lecturer in Cardiff, Percy Ure had a bright idea that there was a direct link between the economic developments of the 7th and 6th centuries BC and the political developments. The Greek tyrant, he thought, owed his power to commerce. In 1921, Methuen published Ure's, quotes, little volume, The Greek Renaissance, the object of which was, quote again, to indicate the scope and character of what the Greeks achieved in the first 2 centuries of their recorded history. In 1922, a year later, Cambridge University Press published The Origin of Tyranny. There it is. Both books rehearsed again his 1906 theory of tyrants' links with economic developments, the Greek Renaissance doing so briefly and vividly, The Origin of Tyranny at greater length with greater scholarship and much more detailed discussion. But the arguments used are identical. The Greek Renaissance was written for, I quote, the reader who is not familiar with Greek history, and accordingly got little mention in scholarly review journals, though Ernest Barker, in Classical Review, noted that Ure's book was, I quote, short in space but exceedingly rich in suggestion. The Origin of Tyranny was also a book which endeavoured, I quote again his own preface, to make the argument intelligible to readers who are not classical scholars and archaeologists. But at almost 400 pages, with 6 appendices, and with a bizarrely thorough index including every scholar whose name occurs in any footnote, it advertised itself as a work of scholarship, and was accordingly much more extensively noted. The reviewers were not convinced. W.R. Halliday, in Classical Review, noting that the core of the idea had already been set forth in the 1906 Journal of Hellenic Studies article, reported that, I quote, to tell the truth, however, Professor Ure's theory does not gain in probability by its new exposition at greater length. And he went on, the book indeed is more conspicuous for ingenuity than judgment. If the consensus is that this is a book that no one needs to have to hand, why have I chosen to dig it up and focus on Ure and tyranny today? When I claim that Ure's tyranny is the tyranny of the archaeologist, I have in mind a very different quality of his work. And this is the expectation that political change must be underpinned by material conditions. Such changes may or may not be visible to or understood by contemporaries, and they're unlikely to respect political or ethnic boundaries. To understand the changes and their effects, we need to look for and at patterns that transcend the terms of discourse of a particular time or the local factors operative in a particular place. Not surprisingly, classicists have not traditionally leapt at the possibility that understanding what happens in the Greek world might require thinking about things that are not expressed in Greek or by Greek writers. Nor have they leapt at the possibility of understanding what happens in the Greek world might involve knowing what else is happening in Iron Age societies, whether around the Mediterranean or in parts further north and east. If Ure was right, in my view, in insisting on investigating the material conditions of tyranny, he was mistaken, in my view, in the methods he adopted to uncover those material conditions. If we're to understand the material base of tyranny, we will only do so by understanding the material record. For all the weakness of his methodology, and for all his own rather partial pursuit of the wider intellectual agenda that his book points towards, Ure's insistence that if we're to understand political change, we must not look myopically at individual societies, but comparatively at the wider world, not narrowly at a single form of evidence, but broadly at all forms of evidence, see not merely in terms of actors' categories, but also with the categories of a range of observers, all this remains as true today as it was 89 years ago. And such a vision remains at the heart of the study of classics. as we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Classics department in this place, is not just the range of material that is dealt with here, from pots in the Ure Museum to Latin subject pronouns, from library buildings in the Roman Empire to papyri from Roman Egypt, that maintains Ure's vision. Is the determination to situate the Greek and Roman worlds against other worlds, against the Hittite world or the Coptic world on the one hand, and against the worlds that have received and understood Greek and Roman art and literature on the other, whether those worlds are inhabited by Enlightenment Germans working in Italy, or by black Africans today reworking Greek tragedies. Being able to handle both text and material culture, being able to see societies from the inside and from the outside, including our own, these hallmarks of classics are what made it necessary to Reading University from its origins. They remain reasons why classics is vital to every university today. When Ure insisted that we need to understand the ancient world in terms of the modern, his practice was disputed by some lecturers at Oxford. Now, even some professors at Oxford would, I think, agree with him. The task of the Classics department for its next 100 years is going to be to convince Vice-Chancellors and politicians, to convince bees and the bureaucrats in the Treasury of the truth of that too. Thank you very much.